The letter said he needed someone who could work. It did not say what kind of work. It did not mention wages past the first season, or whether the house had a second room, or how far the nearest town was from the property. It said the position was on a horse operation outside Pincher Creek, that the man's name was Gideon Murch, and that he expected whoever answered to arrive before the second week of October. She read it twice. Then she folded it along its original crease and put it in her coat pocket, where it stayed for 4 days before she wrote back. She had been in Lethbridge since March, working in the back of a dry goods shop owned by a woman named Mrs. Prentice, who was kind but had a daughter returning from the East in the spring. The arrangement had always been temporary. She had known that. What she had not known was how long temporary would last, or what would come after it. She was not from Alberta. She had come west from Ontario 2 years before, following a man she had thought she understood. And when that turned out to be wrong, she had stayed anyway, because going back would have required explaining things she did not want to explain. She wrote to Gideon Murch that she could arrive by the 1st of October if that was acceptable. She did not list her qualifications. She had grown up on her family's mixed farm outside Orangeville, and before that her grandfather had run a small remuda for a logging outfit near Sudbury, and she had spent enough summers with him to know horses the way some people know weather. Not from study, but from long exposure, from watching and being wrong and watching again. She did not write any of that. She wrote that she could arrive by the 1st of October. He wrote back in 6 days. The letter was shorter than the first. It said that was fine. The road from Pincher Creek to the Murch property ran south along a creek bed that had more gravel than water in it by that time of year. The man who drove her out from town, a quiet Métis man named Theodore, who hauled freight 3 times a week on that road, told her the property had been a good operation once. Before, she asked, he kept his eyes on the road. Before the last few years, she looked at the country. It was different from Ontario, wider, more sky, the mountains standing to the west like something that had not decided yet whether to come closer. The grass along the road was dry but not dead. She noticed that when they came over a low rise and she saw the ranch for the first time, she did the thing she always did. She looked at the horses before she looked at the buildings. There were 6 in the near pasture. She counted them and looked at their condition and at the fence and at the water situation before Theodore had finished pulling the wagon to a stop. The horses were thin, not starved, but thin in the way that comes from stress rather than shortage, from too much movement, not enough consistency. The fence on the east side had been repaired recently and badly. The trough was full, but the wood around it was rotting at the base and there was standing water in the low ground nearby, which meant drainage was not right. Gideon Murch came out of the house while she was still looking. He was older than she had expected. Not old, mid-40s maybe, with the kind of face that had been in wind for a long time. He looked at her with an expression she recognized. He had expected someone else, something other than what she was, and he was adjusting. "You're her," he said. It was not quite a question. "I am," she said. He looked at the wagon, at her single trunk, and then back at her. "Theodore can bring that in," he said. "Come and see what we've got." He did not offer his hand. She followed him toward the barn. The operation had been a quarter-section horse ranch, breeding and training working stock for ranches further south, and for the NWMP remount buyers who came through every second spring. His father had built it. Gideon had run it for 15 years before 2 bad breeding seasons and a wet spring that brought respiratory illness through half the herd had taken most of what they had. He told her this standing in the barn doorway, not looking at her, looking at the horses in the paddock beyond. He told it the way a person tells something they have told before, without expectation, without looking for a response, just laying it out so the other person knows where they stand. She asked how many animals they were working with now. 14, he said. 6 broodmares, 2 stallions. The rest are last year's foals and 3 older working animals I kept back. Who else is here? He was quiet a moment. Had a man named Hollis through the summer. He left in August. There's a boy who comes from the Turnbull place on Wednesdays and Saturdays to help with feeding. She nodded. And you're looking to rebuild the breeding program. He looked at her then, for the first time directly. That's what I said in the letter. You said you needed someone who could work, she said. I'm asking what work you mean. He turned back toward the paddock. Whatever needs doing, he said. I can't afford to be particular. She stayed quiet and let that sit. Her room was off the back of the kitchen, separated from it by a plank door that didn't quite hang level. There was a cot, a washstand, a window that faced east. In the morning, the light came in early. She did not mind that. The first week, she did not try to change anything. She fed and watered. She mucked. She watched. What she saw, the stallions were being kept in adjacent paddocks with only a rail fence between them, which was why they were agitated and burning energy they needed for other things. The broodmares were in reasonable condition, but 2 of them were moving stiffly in the hindquarters, in a way that suggested they had been worked too hard too recently, or not warmed up properly before work. The foals were better, young enough to have come through the bad period without carrying it the same way. She also saw that Gideon Murch knew horses. That was clear. What he had was not ignorance but exhaustion, the kind that comes from fighting a situation for too long without enough hands to fight it properly. He was making small errors he would not have made before, skipping steps, accepting less than he knew was right, because he did not have time or energy to do better. She did not say any of this. At the end of the first week, he asked her what she thought. The stallions need to be out of each other's sight, she said. And the 2 mares in the south paddock, the gray and the one with the blaze, they need to be off work until they move better. He looked at her. I know that. I know you know, she said. I'm telling you what I'll be working on first. He was quiet. Then he nodded once. The Wednesday boy's name was Fletcher Okafor. He was 14, the 3rd son of a family that had come to Alberta from Ontario a decade back and had land adjacent to the Turnbull lease. He was good with the horses in the way of someone who had not been taught wrong yet. Patient, quiet, observant without being stiff about it. She liked him. She did not say so. She put him to work on things she could watch him do and corrected him twice in the first month, both times about how he was reading a horse's ear position, and he did not argue, which she respected. One afternoon in mid-October, he asked her how long she was planning to stay. She was checking the hinds on the gray mare while she answered. I haven't made a decision about that. Murch hasn't had anyone stay since the Hollis fellow, Fletcher said. I heard. Hollis left because… I don't need to know why Hollis left, she said, not unkindly. I need to know if this mare is going to be ready for the spring schedule. Fletcher was quiet for a moment. Is she? She straightened up and looked at the mare's back end, then at the overall posture, the way she was distributing her weight. Ask me in 6 weeks, she said. In November, the temperature dropped fast and stayed. She had been in Alberta for 2 winters by then, but the foothills cold was different from Lethbridge. The wind came off the mountains in a way that had opinions about it. She added a second blanket to the cot and did not complain. What she had begun to understand by then was that the larger problem with the ranch was not the horses. The horses were fixable. The larger problem was the pasture situation on the North Quarter. She had walked it in late October, after the first frost made the ground readable. What she found was that the North Quarter, which should have been the best grazing land on the property, it sloped right, it had tree cover on the windward side, was not producing like it should. The grass was sparse and tired. The kind of sparse that said the land was thirsty in a way that had been going on for a long time. She walked it twice more, separately, a few days apart, following her instinct about where the water should be. On the second walk, she found it, or rather found where it had been. A spring, historically, based on the way the ground dipped and the particular color of the sedge grass in a line running northeast to southwest. Something had shifted, erosion, maybe, or beaver work further up the drainage, and the water was running sideways into a depression where it sat and went to mud rather than spreading across the pasture the way it should. She stood there for a long time looking at it. She did not go to Gideon that evening. She waited 2 more days, walked it a 3rd time, and thought about what she was looking at and what it would take, and whether she was right. She had been wrong about things before. She did not move until she was as certain as she could be. When she did go to him, it was on a Sunday afternoon. He was doing accounts at the kitchen table. She sat down across from him without being invited and put her hands flat on the table. He looked up. The North Quarter is going to grass in 3 or 4 years if the water situation doesn't change, she said. There's a spring up there that's been redirected. Not by much. but enough. He was very still. I know the North Quarter isn't. It used to feed a lot more animals than it's feeding now, she said. I think you know that too. He looked at his accounts. What would it take? He said finally. 2 weeks of work, maybe 3. We'd need to dig out a channel to redirect the flow. Not deep. The grade does most of the work. We just need to give the water a reason to go the right direction. We, he said. Fletcher and I, she said, and you when you can. He sat back. He looked at her with an expression she could not entirely read. Not suspicion, not quite. Something more careful than that. You walked that quarter, he said, 3 times, and you think a channel will do it. I think it's worth trying, she said. And I think if we don't try it, you already know what that North Quarter looks like in 5 years. He looked at the accounts again. She let him. All right, he said. They started the channel work on a Tuesday in late November, the 3 of them. When the ground was frozen hard enough to hold its shape, but not so frozen they couldn't break it. It was slow work. Fletcher complained once about the cold, and she told him cold was just weather, and weather passed, and he went quiet and kept digging. Gideon worked alongside her without speaking much. That was fine. She had not expected conversation. What she noticed was that he worked the way she worked, steadily, without waste, paying attention to what the ground was telling them. When she stopped to reevaluate the grade on the 3rd day, he stopped too and crouched down to look at the thing she was looking at. You'd angle it there, he said, pointing. A little further, she said. See where the soil changes color? That's where the old channel ran. He looked. A moment. Right, he said, and stood up. By the end of the 3rd week of December, water was moving differently across the North Quarter. Not perfectly, not yet. But the direction was right, and in the low spots where the grass had been thinnest, she could already see the difference in the moisture. A slight darkening of the ground, the sedge greening a little even this late in the year. She did not say anything about it. Neither did he, but she noticed he walked the North Quarter himself one evening, alone while she was doing the evening feed. She did not watch, she had things to do. Christmas came and went quietly. There was no family. A woman from town named Mrs. Sutherland brought a tin of shortbread out with her husband when they came to look at one of the working horses. And Gideon left the tin on the kitchen table. She and Fletcher ate most of it on the Wednesday after the holiday, standing in the barn doorway watching the mares in the paddock and not talking about anything in particular. Fletcher asked her once, around that time, whether she had people somewhere. She thought about the question before she answered it. I had a father, she said. He's gone now, and a grandfather who taught me most of what I know about horses. She paused. He's gone too. What about? Fletcher started. No, she said, not sharply, just clearly. He nodded and did not ask more. She appreciated that about him. The breeding decisions for spring were the next question, and this was where she expected disagreement. She had been watching the stallions all winter. The older one, Gideon's established breeding stallion, a dark bay with a strong quarter horse frame, was reliable and proven. The records showed consistent offspring, good bone, few problems. But he was 7 years old and beginning to show it in his hind movement. And in the current herd, he was too closely related to 3 of the broodmares to use them this season. The younger stallion had come from a dispersal sale 2 years ago. Gideon had bought him as an investment, but something, the bad seasons, the depleted herd, the loss of the hired man, had meant he'd never been properly integrated into the breeding program. He was 4 and green, and she had spent the last 2 months watching him. What she saw was a horse that was nervous because he had been kept wrong, not because there was anything wrong with him. He was smart, and he was physically correct in ways that mattered. Deep chest, clean legs, a hind end that promised athletes. He was interested in the mares and not aggressive about it, which told her something. She brought this to Gideon on a January evening by the stove. She laid it out plainly, which mares to use this season, which to rest, and why she wanted to bring the younger stallion into service with 3 of the broodmares rather than rely solely on the older horse. Gideon listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "That horse has never covered a mare." "I know," she said. "You want to start him this season. I want to start him with 3 mares I've selected. I'll be there for the first cover. I want to see how he handles it. And if he doesn't handle it, then I was wrong," she said. "And we'll know that and we'll adjust." He looked at the stove. The fire was settling. Outside, the wind was doing what it always did off the mountains at that hour. "You've done this before," he said. It was not quite a question. "My grandfather ran a remuda," she said. "I watched him make these decisions every spring for 6 years." He was quiet for a long time. "All right," he said. It was the same thing he had said about the channel. She was beginning to understand that about him. That when he agreed to something, he agreed to it fully, without residue, and then moved on. She respected that. It was not a small thing. February, March. She had been at the ranch 5 months. The spring breeding season started in mid-March, later than further south because of the elevation. She was ready. She had the mares in condition. She had worked with the young stallion through the winter, not formally, but consistently, handling him, moving him, getting him used to her presence and her authority in a way that wasn't about dominance so much as clarity. Horses were easier when they knew what was expected. The first cover went well, better than well. He was attentive and not rough, and when it was done, he stood quietly and let her check him over. She ran her hand along his neck and said nothing in particular. Fletcher had watched from outside the paddock. Afterward, he said, "He did all right." "He did fine," she said. She recorded it in the breeding log, date, mare, stallion, conditions, and underlined the entry once, which was something her grandfather had done for a cover he felt good about. She had not thought about that habit in years. She did not explain it to anyone. The NWMP remount buyer came in April. His name was Sergeant Alec Porteous, a broad-shouldered man from Nova Scotia who had been buying horses for the force for 11 years and had opinions about everything. He went through the paddocks methodically, the way a man does when he has seen a lot of horses, and learned what to look for. He stopped at the young stallion. "Whose is this?" he said. "Mine," Gideon said. He was standing just behind her left shoulder. "Where'd you get him?" "Dispersal sale." Lacombe, 2 years back. Porteous looked at the horse for a long time. "He wasn't bred here before the season?" "No," Gideon said. Porteous looked at her. She had not introduced herself, and he had not asked. "You brought him into the program?" "This spring," she said. He nodded slowly, the way of someone recalculating. "I'll want to see the foals from him in a couple years." "You'll have to come back then," she said. He almost smiled. He looked at Gideon. "You've improved your stock management," he said. It was not a compliment exactly. It was an observation which was worth more. He bought 2 of the working horses and left a standing order for the following spring, contingent on the foal crop. After his truck cleared the property line, Fletcher said under his breath, "He didn't know you were the one who did it." "He doesn't need to know," she said. "But, Fletcher," she turned to look at him. "The horses don't know either. The work is still the work." He thought about that. "That doesn't bother you." She looked out at the paddock where the mares were moving slow and easy in the afternoon sun. The north quarter in the distance was green in a way it had not been when she arrived. "Things are different here than they were in October," she said. "I know that. That's enough." In May, Gideon asked her to stay another year. He asked it standing in the barn, not looking at her, running his hand along the neck of the gray mare, who had recovered fully and was due in late June. He said he could offer better wages than the first season, and that he would have the room at the back of the kitchen properly insulated before winter. She looked at the mare, at the changes in her, the good weight, the ease in her stance, the alertness that had been missing when she arrived. She thought about the breeding log in the desk drawer. She thought about the north quarter and the spring scene running the right direction. She thought about what the property would look like in 2 more years if the work continued, and what it would look like if she left and the work did not. She was not sure what she was building here. She was not sure she could say, but she knew unfinished work when she was standing in the middle of it. "The insulation first," she said. "Before November this time." He looked up at her then. There was something in his face that was not quite relief and not quite surprise. The look of a man who had learned not to expect things going right and was quietly recalibrating. "Before November," he said. She nodded once and went to fill the water trough. She found a clipping from the McLeod Gazette in November of the following year, folded into the back of the desk ledger where Gideon kept old correspondence. The clipping was from a piece about operations in the Pincher Creek area that had rebuilt after difficult seasons. the Murch property was mentioned in one sentence. It said the ranch had been recently revived under new management. She read that sentence twice. Then she got out a pencil and drew a slow line through new management and wrote in the margin above it, improved. Not new. The foundation had always been there. She had only helped it find the direction it was already supposed to go. She folded the clipping along the same crease it had come in, set it back in the ledger, and closed the cover. There was morning work to do, and the gray mare's second foal was due within the week, and she had things to check on before the light changed. She went outside.